Let us pray. Dear Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your hearing. Amen. How are you feeling right now? Well, student minister standing in front. The church just opened a nice cold beer. How does it make you feel? Thirsty. So I'm hearing thirsty. I'm hearing jealous. Anyone angry? All right. Anxious, perhaps? Surprised? Curious? Shocked? Concerned? And what if I drank it? Uh-oh. Standing here in the middle of worship on a Sunday morning, what if I drank it? How would that make you feel? Very surprised. Shocked. Would that make someone angry? Yeah. I heard a yeah. Now we're getting angry. Yeah. Yeah. How dare I? Now what about, this was a Tuesday night, and you saw me coming out of a pub with a woman other than my wife on my arm. How would that make you feel? Disgusted. It could be my sister. Disgusted. Ready to tell somebody. Yeah. Would you be outraged? Some who should be outraged. Show me. Yeah. No, honestly, because while some laugh and there is nervous laughters, others would be outraged. And you know what? Thank you for sharing your feeling. Outraged, perhaps. Fine. Some of you, I'm sure, would be rushing home to call Marjorie. Special session meeting in order for some disciplinary action, perhaps. Some of you would be thinking that that really isn't a way for a proper minister to act. So here's the question. What does the way that you just reacted, and you had a reaction, each one of you, what does that reaction tell you about what you think it means to be a Christian? Can you be a Christian in a pub at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday evening? Or is Christianity about living by the rules to be confined to church on a Sunday morning? This is really the same question that Matthew was writing about in today's gospel. The passage that we read was a passage about identity. The identity of the fledgling community of Jews who believed that Jesus was the Messiah. For them, believing in Jesus didn't make them any more or less Jewish. They still read the Torah, followed the Jewish customs, and worshiped in the synagogue. Well, that is, until they were labeled as deviants. Then they were ostracized. They were kicked out of the synagogue, banned from worshiping their God in their place of worship because of their interpretation and understanding of Torah and the Jewish faith through the understanding of the teachings of Jesus. David Balch, in the book Social History of the Mathenian Community, explains it in this way. Matthew's community was a Jewish Christian group that kept the whole law, interpreted through the Jesus tradition. To the mainline Pharisaic tradition, so to the Pharisees, Matthew's community would have been labeled deviant by the authorities and by the members of the Jewish community in the area. It was to this Jewish group, who had been labeled deviants, who had been kicked out of the community, and who were struggling to find their identity, that Matthew is writing this story about the life of Jesus. As we delve deeper into this story, I'll invite you to reflect upon what kind of group it is that you belong, and to what kind of group you feel that the congregation here at Tweedsmuir is. The question is this: do you belong to a deviant group? Or do you belong to a group that is more interested in preserving the values and the norms of the way that things were? As we dwell in these questions, I'd like to bring us back to the description of Jesus and the perception of Jesus and his activities by the leaders of the Jews. Jesus was described by the religious leaders as a drunkard and a glutton. Jesus was described as the friend of tax collectors and the friend of sinners. Jesus was the deviant. He was the one on the outside. This is a description of Jesus as someone who does not fit within the bounds of the social norms of the religious Jewish people of the time. From the perspective of the wise leaders, it is apparent that Jesus is a deviant and does not fit. So it really is no surprise that his followers would really be kicked out of the synagogue, is it? So Jesus is considered a deviant. Why? What has he done that is so wrong? What did he do that was perceived to be so far outside the norms of religious practice? See, it appears from the passage that he was condemned as a deviant for eating and drinking with his friends. See, well, that doesn't sound so bad. Maybe it was the amount that he ate or drank. Or maybe it was because of who he called friend: the tax collectors and the sinners. Now, it is hard to find a parallel in our world that captures how despised the tax collectors were at the time of Jesus. We must remember that the Jews were living in a time of occupation. The Romans were holding these people prisoner in their own land. They were forced to find allegiance to the Romans, and there were economic burdens on every single person. The Romans were hated by the Jews, and the tax collectors worked for them, collaborated with them got rich from the workings of their own people. Yeah, the tax collectors were hated. And the sinners, prostitutes, who were also ritually unclean. In a society that followed very strict cleanliness laws, these sinners were near the bottom, to say nothing about the inappropriateness of male and female relationships. And it is to these people that Jesus called friend. It is no wonder that his followers were ostracized and labeled as deviants. Jesus called these people friend. He called the tax collectors and the prostitutes friend. He called those who were despised by the norms and values of society friend. He sat down and he ate and he drank with the marginalized and those who were condemned and ostracized. But he did more. He called them friend. He made friends with them. He involved himself in their lives and did not pity or act in ways which were condescending. He sat and ate with the prostitutes, and he shared their stories. He would have listened to their struggles and offered support. He would have drank with the tax collectors and listened to their woes, the struggles that they had in the midst of a world that was brutal. Jesus would have done this with compassion. He would have done this with care and without judgment or coercion. He would have felt their anger and their shame and their sorrow, as well as their joy and their gladness and their triumphs, because he was their friend. He was a friend to the person who was marginalized in society. So what is a friend? We heard it today. We heard your words. We heard that a friend is someone that listens when someone needs to hear. We heard that a friend is someone that holds in confidence things that should not be retold. We heard that a friend is a person who sticks by you when you've done things that should not have been done. And a friend is someone who forgives, because that is what friends do. Jesus was a friend. So what could it look like for you to be a friend of the marginalized in our society today? Who are the ones who have been lost or are considered deviants by the leaders of our community and the community of Orangeville? Can we and do we call these people our friends? As I spent time in Orangeville over the fall and winter, I heard conversations in coffee shops and read the paper, and I learned about the problems in Orangeville. I learned about the drug dealers and how Orangeville has become the place of entry for drug trafficking to northern Ontario. I learned that the number of single parents is increasing. I learned that the drop-in center was being opened to feed meals to people in Orangeville who do not have enough to eat. And I heard about the problem of the kids living on the streets. Vagrants, they were called, and bums and thieves who were destroying the beautiful community of Orangeville. Would you want to call these people friend? What would being a friend to the single mother look like? Could it look like sharing a meal at the lighthouse with a young mother and listening with care and compassion? What would being a friend to the kid on the street look like? Could it be sharing a meal that you have prepared together and laughing at a story without judgment about the way that they live? These are not easy questions. These, I hope, are challenging questions that make us uneasy, like opening a beer in the middle of worship. Questions, I hope, that open up reflection on what it means for us to truly live as Christians, that challenge us to make decisions about what it is that we are willing to risk. So as we conclude our reflection, a question for you to ponder. Are you willing to eat and drink with the person that no one else calls friend? Amen.